How inmates are transferred to Mississippi State Penitentiary, Parchman. In the middle of the Mississippi Delta, where cotton fields stretch farther than the eye can see, lies one of the most infamous prisons in American history. A place so large it's often described as a town of its own. A place so old that parts of it predate modern prison standards. And a place where, every week, new inmates arrive through a tightly controlled, and rarely seen, transfer system. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a process the public almost never witnesses: how inmates are transferred to the Mississippi State Penitentiary, better known as Parchman. This is not Hollywood's version of a prison transport. There are no dramatic sirens, no over-the-top chases, and no theatrics. Instead, the real process is far more bureaucratic, far more methodical, and in many ways, far more revealing about how Mississippi's corrections system actually functions. But despite being a routine part of the criminal justice system, the details of inmate transfers remain largely hidden, known mostly to correctional staff, state officials, and those who have lived through the process themselves. Today, we're going to walk through this system step by step. From the courtroom, to the county jail, to the moment an inmate steps through Parchman's front gates. This is a factual, documented look inside a little understood world.
Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started.
Setting the stage, what is Parchman? Before we can understand how inmates arrive at Parchman, we have to understand where they're going. Parchman isn't just a prison. It's a 47-square-mile correctional complex, founded in 1901 and built on what was once a series of plantations. The facility is divided into multiple units, each varying in security level and purpose. Historically, Parchman was structured around agricultural labor. Inmates worked the fields under armed supervision, an arrangement that has been heavily scrutinized and written about for decades. Over time, the prison evolved into what it is today, Mississippi's primary maximum security facility and the location of the state's death row. Because of its size, security level, and available facilities, Parchman receives inmates from all over Mississippi, male offenders with long sentences, high security classifications, or inmates requiring placement the state's smaller regional facilities can't accommodate. But even with its century-long history, the process by which inmates arrive here has remained largely out of public view. That's what we're breaking down today. Where the process actually begins. For most people entering the Mississippi prison system, the journey to Parchman doesn't begin inside the prison itself. It begins in a county courtroom. Once a defendant is convicted, and once sentencing has been handed down, the individual is legally transferred to the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections. But here's where many people misunderstand the process. MDOC doesn't instantly take physical custody. In reality, the newly sentenced inmate is held temporarily in a county jail, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. The length of time varies depending on transport schedules, MDOC capacity, and administrative processing. During this waiting period, the inmate is no longer under county authority in terms of long-term custody. They are simply being held until MDOC can bring them into the state system. This step, often overlooked, is the first stage of the transfer pipeline. County jail holding period. The time an inmate spends in a county jail after sentencing isn't just waiting. Several critical steps happen here. 1. MDOC is notified of the new commitment. Once paperwork is finalized, the county clerk forwards the sentencing documents, called commitment papers, to MDOC. 2. The inmate is scheduled for transfer. MDOC determines the date the individual will be moved into the state system. This scheduling is not public information, and the specific timing is rarely disclosed to inmates for security reasons. 3. County jail staff prepare the inmate for intake. This preparation includes verifying identity, confirming the sentencing details, ensuring no outstanding warrants or holds, preparing medical documentation if applicable. Depending on the jail, Inmates may receive limited information about where they are going, though many already understand that most long-term male offenders in Mississippi are initially sent to Parchman or the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility for classification. 4. The inmate waits. The holding period can vary dramatically. Some inmates are transferred within a week. Others wait significantly longer, depending on statewide capacity, transportation staffing, and system backlogs. These delays have been the subject of numerous investigations and lawsuits in Mississippi, especially in larger counties where jail overcrowding has been a recurring issue. But once MDOC sets the transfer schedule, the next stage begins: direct transport. The transport order. Before an inmate ever steps onto a transport vehicle, an essential piece of paperwork is created. The official transport order. This document authorizes the movement of the inmate from county custody to the Mississippi Department of Corrections. It includes the inmate's full legal name, MDOC number, if already issued, sentencing details, security classification, temporary until full intake is completed, any special conditions, such as medical needs or separation requirements, the designated intake location. For many inmates, the intake location is listed simply as MSP, Mississippi State Penitentiary. Transport orders also help coordinate communication between county sheriffs, MDOC transport officers, intake unit staff at Parchman, and the statewide classification system. Without this document, no inmate can legally be transferred to a state facility. Once the paperwork is approved, transport officers receive the schedule, and preparations begin for the physical movement of the inmate. Day of transfer, security prep. Transport day begins early, usually before sunrise. While exact procedures can vary slightly between counties, the core steps are consistent statewide. 1. Officers assemble and brief. Transport teams review the list of inmates being moved, each individual's security level, any special alerts, medical issues, behavioral concerns, escape risk, the route, estimated travel time, and communication protocols. 2. Vehicles are inspected. Standard checks include fuel levels, tire pressure, restraint systems, interior security barriers, emergency equipment. 3. County jail staff prepare inmates for pickup. This includes verifying the inmate's identity, conducting searches, collecting personal property for transfer, securing the inmate with approved restraints. Most Mississippi counties use standard metal handcuffs and waist chains. Ankle restraints may also be applied depending on risk classification. 4. Final documentation is signed. When MDOC transport officers arrive, county staff hand over commitment papers, medical documents, property logs, custody transfer forms. At this point, legal responsibility for the inmate officially shifts from the county to the state. What happens next is one of the most controlled parts of the entire system: the physical loading of inmates into transport vehicles. The transport vehicles. Mississippi inmate transfers typically use two types of vehicles: secure transport vans, large multi-inmate transport buses. These vehicles are designed specifically for prisoner movement and include reinforced interiors, barred or meshed windows, locked compartments, radio communication systems, GPS monitoring, in later model units. The vehicles are not luxurious, far from it. They are functional, sturdy, and intentionally minimal to reduce risk and maintain control during transport. Seating arrangements depend on inmate classification, number of inmates being moved, separation requirements. Some inmates may be isolated in individual compartments if classified as high risk or if separation is required due to known conflicts. Once all inmates are loaded, officers conduct a final head count. Only then does the transport begin. Departure, leaving county custody. The moment the vehicle pulls away from the county jail marks a major turning point. The inmate is no longer held by the county. They are now fully under the custody and responsibility of the Mississippi Department of Corrections. Transport convoys typically follow predetermined routes that avoid unnecessary stops, minimize exposure to high-traffic areas, maintain consistent radio coverage. For safety and confidentiality, MDOC does not release transport routes to the public. Even inmates on board rarely know the exact path being taken. During the ride, officers maintain strict protocols. No unapproved communication. No unscheduled stops. No removal of restraints. Constant visual monitoring. This is one of the longest, but also most routine, parts of the journey. And at the end of the road lies one of the most heavily secured facilities in the state. Arrival, intake, and initial processing. Approaching Parchman. As the transport vehicle enters Sunflower County, the landscape begins to shift. The fields open wider. Traffic thins. And the signs of civilization become sparse until almost nothing remains but long stretches of farmland and sky. This isolation is not accidental. When Parchman was established in the early 1900s, its remote location was designed to prevent escape, reduce public scrutiny, and maintain a self-contained correctional environment. It's a place intentionally removed from nearby towns, so much so that inmates often describe the approach as feeling like they're being taken off the map. As the bus rolls closer, correctional officers inside begin preparing for arrival. Radio calls confirm the transport's ETA. Intake staff are notified to await the vehicle. And the inmates, many of whom have never been inside a state prison before, realize this is the moment their new reality begins. The gates of Parchman loom ahead. The front gate protocol. Arriving at the Mississippi State Penitentiary is not as simple as pulling up and unloading. Every transport must pass through a strict, layered security protocol before entering the facility grounds. 1. Identification check. Gate officers confirm. Transport team identities. MDOC credentials. The list of inmates being delivered. 2. Vehicle inspection. The transport vehicle is checked for tampering, unapproved occupants, unauthorized materials, mechanical abnormalities that could pose security risks. While the specifics of the inspection process are not publicly detailed for safety reasons, standard correctional procedure nationwide includes checking undercarriages, interior compartments, locking mechanisms, security seals. 3. Gate clearance. Once verification is complete, the front gate opens, slowly, methodically. The transport vehicle moves through the outer gate. The gate closes behind it. Only then does the inner gate open. This double-gate system is standard in high-security facilities, designed to prevent breach or tailgating. For inmates, this moment is often the clearest marker that they've fully entered the state prison system. There is no turning back, no lingering uncertainty, and no ambiguity. They are now at Parchman. Arrival at the intake unit. At Parchman, intake typically occurs at a designated unit equipped for processing new inmates. Historically, this has included various administrative and housing structures depending on operational changes over time. The moment the vehicle stops, the next phase begins. 1. Controlled unloading. Inmates exit the vehicle one at a time under officer supervision. A new head count is performed immediately upon unloading. 2. Transfer documentation. Transport officers hand over commitment papers, identification documents, medical files, custody transfer logs. Parchman's intake staff verify every document before assuming legal responsibility. 3. Placement in holding areas. New arrivals are escorted into a secure, controlled environment where they await the next steps of intake. Conditions vary depending on facility operations, but holding areas are designed for short-term occupancy while assessments take place. 4. Separation protocols. If any inmate has separation orders, due to known conflicts, protective needs, or gang affiliations, they are held apart from the general arrival group. In Mississippi, separation policies are especially important given the history of gang activity, violence, and federal scrutiny within certain prison units. This early separation helps reduce risk during the intake process. The search and inventory process. Once inside the intake unit, inmates undergo a complete search and inventory. This stage serves two purposes: to prevent contraband from entering the prison, to document and secure all inmate property in accordance with state policy. The search. All inmates undergo a full-body search, removal of personal clothing, inspection of any medical devices, verification of restraint removal. This is standard procedure in state prisons across the U.S., and Mississippi is no exception. Property inventory. Any items allowed to remain with the inmate, such as limited personal papers, are recorded. Items not permitted in housing units are stored and will be returned at release or transfer. Property is logged with full inmate name, MDOC number, date and intake unit, detailed item descriptions. Inaccurate property handling has been the subject of inmate grievances statewide, which is why documentation is emphasized during intake. Once property is secured, inmates receiving state-issued clothing are moved to the next stage, medical screening. Medical screening. Medical screening is one of the most critical, and legally required, components of inmate intake. Mississippi, like every state, must evaluate new inmates for immediate medical needs, chronic conditions, mental health concerns, communicable diseases, medication requirements. This screening is mandated by constitutional standards established through decades of court precedent regarding inmate healthcare. Medical steps typically include basic physical exam, vital signs, tuberculosis screening, mental health assessment, documentation of injuries or pre-existing conditions, verification of prescribed medications. The severity of an inmate's medical needs can determine where they are housed, whether they are placed in the infirmary, or whether additional testing is required before assignment. Some inmates may be flagged for follow-up appointments or immediate care. Others may receive clearance to proceed to the next stage of intake. Medical screening is also where staff identify suicide risks or acute mental health concerns, which can change an inmate's classification. Fingerprinting, photos and data entry. Once medical screening is complete, inmates move to the administrative processing area for identification and data entry. 1. Fingerprinting. MDOC fingerprints every new arrival, even if they were previously fingerprinted at the county level, to ensure accurate record linking. 2. Intake photographs. Photographs are taken for internal records, classification databases, housing unit identification cards. These images follow strict guidelines to ensure consistency across the system. 3. Digital profile creation. MDOC staff enter inmate information into the statewide management system, which tracks sentence length, custody status, parole eligibility, gang affiliation indicators, if documented, medical alerts, separation orders. This centralized database helps determine everything from housing placement to job assignments and programming eligibility. Once the digital profile is created, the inmate moves to the most consequential stage of intake, classification. Classification, the decision that shapes everything. Classification is the backbone of the inmate transfer system. It determines where an inmate will live, what restrictions they'll face, and how their time at Parchman will unfold. Mississippi uses a structured classification system that evaluates each inmate based on the severity of their offense, sentence length, escape history, institutional behavior, if returning to custody, known gang affiliation, if documented, mental health needs, physical health status, detainers or pending charges, temporary versus permanent classification. During intake, inmates often receive a temporary classification. A full classification review happens later, once additional evaluations are complete. Why classification matters? It determines placement in maximum security units, medium security housing, work programs, where applicable, protective custody, specialized units for mental health or medical needs. For decades, misclassification has been cited in lawsuits involving Mississippi prisons, particularly when vulnerable or incompatible inmates were housed together. That's why intake classification is treated as one of the most important steps in the arrival process. Issuing state clothing and basic supplies. Before housing assignment, inmates receive their basic necessities, items standardized across MDOC facilities. These typically include state-issued pants and shirt, undergarments, socks, shoes, a blanket, a mattress or mattress roll, hygiene kit, soap, toothbrush, etc. The exact contents can vary depending on supply availability and facility policies. In recent years, news reports and audits have revealed supply shortages or inconsistent distribution at certain times, but the state's official policy outlines the items inmates must receive upon intake. Once equipped, inmates are escorted to the final stage of their arrival journey, housing assignment. Housing assignment, entering the general population. Housing assignment is the culmination of the entire transfer process. After classification, medical checks, and identification documentation, inmates are placed into units based on security level, bed availability, gang separation requirements, medical or mental health needs, disciplinary status, for those arriving from other MDOC facilities, Parchman's housing diversity. Depending on operational status, housing units at Parchman may include maximum security units, medium security facilities, working units tied to agricultural operations, support units, dedicated medical or mental health facilities, death row. Which unit an inmate enters shapes their daily life, access to programs, level of movement, and overall environment. The first hours in housing. Once inside their assigned unit, inmates receive their bed location. Basic orientation rules. Introductions to the unit officer. Instructions regarding chow hall schedules, yard time, and commissary. This is often described by former inmates as the most disorienting part of the entire process, not because of the rules, but because it is the moment the reality settles in. They are no longer in a temporary holding center or transport bus. They are now officially housed inside one of the largest and most historically significant prisons in the United States. What the transfer process reveals. The journey from a Mississippi County courtroom to the gates of Parchman is not a single moment. It's a chain of procedures, paperwork, screenings, and security checks designed to transition a person from local custody into one of the state's most historically significant and heavily scrutinized correctional institutions. Every step along that chain, from the commitment papers, to the transport roster, to the intake cameras and classification forms, reveals something important. Mississippi's correctional system is not built around dramatic moments. It's built around process. A process shaped by decades of policy, court rulings, investigations, and reforms. A process that determines where inmates will live, how they will be supervised, and what their experience inside the system will look like. And while much of that process happens away from public view, it continues every day, silently moving people across the state, through layers of security, and into the vast, complex world behind Parchman's walls. Thanks for watching this factual look into how Mississippi inmates are transferred to Parchman. If you'd like to see more verified, research-based documentaries on prisons, crime, or the justice system, feel free to subscribe and check out the next video. Stay informed. Stay curious. And as always, thanks for being here.